Hey everyone, Robert here, author of Expansion Mastery, the practical guide to living a fully engaged life. Are you ready to start living life to the fullest? Are you ready and willing to transform yourself and your life from ordinary to extraordinary? Then you're in the right place. Welcome, my friends, to the Fully Engaged Life. Welcome back to the show, everyone. You know, I've been doing this a long time now, and I've found that one of the most feared, hated, and misunderstood topics of spirituality is that of letting go. But what if I told you that it's really not anything to be afraid of? That there's no need to hate that idea? All it requires is a little bit of clear comprehension in order to understand what it's truly about. In working with this material for 30 to 35 years, it's been my experience that as soon as this subject of letting go is breached, it causes an immediate fear reaction. The ego-dominated mind starts screaming things like, "Hey, wait a minute. No way am I doing that. I shouldn't have to change. I like who I am. I'm not going to change." Because it's the ego that loves to cling and to attach and to resist change, which, of course, are all things that are the opposite of letting go. It's the ego-driven left brain dominant reaction that's the problem. This is what sparks the fear and resistance to letting go. It's what blocks your progress. It's what may prevent you altogether from even getting started in real spiritual practices. But once you actually get the idea of what it really means to let go, the fear will dissipate. I'll break it down for you a little bit. In spirituality, there's an area of practice one reaches that is commonly referred to as letting go. This can refer to different things at different times and can even differ between various spiritual systems. However, the idea of letting go is inherent in all authentic spirituality. So I'll share a few examples of this before moving into some specifics. One of the biggest areas is that of letting go of the self. This is the one that everyone seems to fear the most. But let's understand what it is and what it is not. First of all, many people have the tendency to have an unconscious mental reaction, which creates an incorrect conclusion of this based upon the left brain ego reaction. But the left brain cannot truly grasp the idea of letting go, nor does it want to, because most of the time when we let go, it disempowers the ego, and it is within the left brain. All right, so when I'm speaking of letting go of the self, what I'm referring to here is letting go of what is considered to be the small self, not the big self. This distinction must be made. The small self refers to the ego, the false master, that part of your mind that tricks you into believing that it's the real you, your real voice. Well, it isn't. The big self refers to the real you, that part beyond the mind, your essence, which is essentially vibrating energetic consciousness. In order to once again know your true self, your big self, you must turn away from the false self, that which is a smaller self. There are specific spiritual practices that help us achieve this, and it's why allowing the ego to die is a critical step in any authentic spiritual system. Most often, people have a tendency to jump to an incorrect conclusion that if they do this, if they let go of themselves, part of them will die. And then the ego tells them things like, "But I like who I am. And I like the way I am, and I don't want to change. And if I'm not who I am now, then who will I be? No, I'm not going to do it, right? These are the things that go through the mind. And I know because I've had students and clients alike actually express this verbally to me. What they've failed to realize is that this is just the ego's misguided attempt to protect itself. When you go through this process of letting go of the self, the only part that you lose is the false self, the ego. This then allows for the reconnection to your true self. How can that possibly be a bad thing? How can that possibly be frightening? It can't and it isn't, unless you fall victim to the rants and the ravings and the fear-mongering of your own ego. When the ego dies, that is the small self. That is what dies. And what happens is it allows you to once again reconnect to the bigger self, your true nature, your essence. So within spirituality, this is one of the biggest areas that is referred to in the practices of letting go. And this indicates that we just allow the ego to die. And in order to do that, you don't have to fight it. You don't have to act in resistance to it. All you have to do is allow it to die. Now, letting go can also refer to releasing various things that hinder your progress. Also, things that the mind tends to cling to, which also hinders your progress. All those things that the mind attaches to and attempts to grab onto and hold on tightly to, all of these things we end up having to let go of. Now, this commonly includes things like faulty beliefs, and beliefs can be some of the most difficult things to let go of. So we're going to use that as an example later on in the program. Usually this is some form of resistance to change. Now, generally, it's wanting things to stay the way they are or the way you want them to be instead of allowing them to be as they are. So practices involving the idea of letting go are also centered around this area. Now, letting go also refers to letting go of negative mental and physical patterns in favor of new, more positive ones. This is perhaps the easiest place to start working with the idea of letting go, as it's far less intimidating than anything else. In order to make positive changes in yourself and your life, all you have to do is let go of the old behaviors and create new preferred behaviors. The idea that we have to undergo some form of intense healing process and healing the past and all these other things in order to accomplish this is just rubbish. This notion has been created and perpetuated by the fake spiritualists out there that don't know any better. But here's how the process actually works. Let's say that there's something about yourself that you have the desire to change. And this will usually come up and be recognized through various spiritual practices. And then there are practices that help you engage that. But they will address the idea of letting go. So you now realize that there's some negative behavior and you want to create a better you. So you want to do something to change. Many times when we begin to go into spiritual practices, we find things about ourselves that we don't like. I know that was certainly the case for myself. I found many things that I didn't like, and I didn't like it at all. And I wanted to change that so bad. I knew I could be a better person. There was things about myself that I just didn't want anymore. I didn't want to be that person anymore. This is very common when you start going into the spiritual practices. You're going to see these things. This is when it brings the unconscious mental patterns into your conscious mind, where you can then work with them. First, you have to realize that there was some sort of issue, that there is something about yourself that needs to be changed, that you desire to change. Now, it may be that you already know some of these things, like, well, I'm a very fearful person, or I'm a very negative person by nature, or whatever it is. Those things about yourself that you already have brought into your conscious mind and you're aware of you want to change. Spiritual practices will help you do that. For some people, they just go into it not really fully conscious of anything they want to change, and they have to discover it through the practices. So it can happen either way. But the first thing we have to do is to realize that there is a negative behavior that is being generated by an unconscious mental pattern. So then we can isolate that pattern, bring it into the conscious mind, where we can become more aware of it and verify that we do indeed act that particular way. Then, once this otherwise unconscious behavior that's been hiding in the shadows has been brought to light, it's easy to work on it. That's where you start to replace whatever that negative aspect is with something more positive. And it's usually here in the practices where you begin to observe how this negative behavior arises in the first place. See, the idea is to seek out the root cause of it. Now, we don't have to relive it and we don't have to heal from it. We usually don't have to go through all those things. However, sometimes certain feelings or thoughts associated with that root cause may arise. And when they surface, this is fine. What we do is we allow them to rise and fall like the tide. Allow them to come without generating any new emotional attachment to them. Instead, simply observing them. Remove all emotional attachment. This is how you disempower them. This is the first plug that you pull. We allow them to come and go. We just watch them. We watch them arise. We understand, that's where that came from. Okay, no wonder. And then you just let it go away. Generally, there's nothing more to it than that. When you can do this without any mental or emotional clinging, there's no healing necessary. That is the healing. Any other form of healing is only necessary because you are still clinging so tightly to these emotional ties, usually because it's been entangled into part of your personal identity. And if this is the case, then no healing can take place anyway until you've let go of the clinging to it as part of yourself. You've got to let go of the clinging to the thing that you're trying to change. But the way that the spiritual practices engage the subconscious mind, you'll find that it is unnecessary. Most of the time, what you're going to do is to engage the practice and then just allow it to soak in a little bit. You're going to allow it to percolate, right? You're going to allow the subconscious mind to take it, start to deal with it, make the changes. And in that time, you may have some feelings or some thoughts arise, but just allow them. Just observe them as they and go, oh, yeah, there it goes. There it goes. It's gone. And it'll take care of itself. Once you understand that behavior is there, it starts to weaken it. Once you expose it and you find the root cause of it, it disempowers that even further. And the more you disempower these sort of things, the more empowered you actually become, the real you, the big you. But you don't always have to relive it. You don't have to keep going through the pain again and again. All you have to do is let it go. Just let it come up, notice it, and just watch it as it goes away, and then it can be gone. Most of the time, what's going to happen through these practices is the subconscious mind is going to sort it out. You might have some dreams coming up, right, or whatever, and wow, I haven't thought of that in a long time, or what. No, it's because of the practice. The subconscious mind is at work purging all of that stuff that it doesn't need anymore that is associated with the bad behaviors that you're trying to replace with the good ones, or just be free of the bad ones. And it's just getting rid of them, it's letting it go. That's how the mind does that. So then it's gone. And you might notice that, you know what? I haven't felt that in forever now, or I haven't thought about that anymore. And even then, when you do think about it, it doesn't have any power over you anymore. The only time that it's such a big deal and healing is required when you're trying to let go of something is because you refuse to let go of it. You are in your own way. You're so emotionally attached and you don't have control over your emotions enough to handle this process. This is why, within spiritual practices, including mindfulness practices, we actively engage the emotions. We strive to get our emotions under control before we go too far into letting go, because then it makes letting go so much easier. So once you have established this and you are able to observe the root cause of this particular behavior that you would like to rid yourself of, and you have worked with it enough to allow the subconscious to start to sort it out and to purge that area of the mind that hangs on to that, from there, all you have to do is begin focusing your intention and your attention on a preferred behavior or state of being in order to change it. You can even just focus on being free of the thing in order to change it. You don't always have to replace it with something else. Depends what it is. Maybe it's something you just want to be free of, you want to be rid of. Maybe it's something that you go, I react this way, and instead of reacting in this situation, I want to learn how to respond correctly to that situation. So this is the difference in the way to know whether you're just going to be free of it or whether you're going to change it into something positive. You see, when you set your intention towards behaving in a more positive way and you hold your attention on that, making sure that you don't backslide into the old unconscious negative habit, you are already engaging the act of letting go. Can you see that? Can you see how that works? It doesn't have to be a huge inner battle. It doesn't have to be a massive emotional struggle. It's just that you focus on the good thing instead of the bad thing. You focus on being free of it instead of being shackled to it. This is in itself a form of letting go. Now, that doesn't sound too tough at all, does it? Think about it. Our thoughts are the very building blocks of our own reality. And our intentions and our attention are both ways to direct our mind and thoughts in a manner we desire, thereby creating a new reality, a reality that we desire. This is how you change yourself and your life from ordinary to extraordinary. So let's take a look at an example of this, and I'll use one of my own personal examples to help you understand. So we're going to do something easy. However, it's going to be centered around a belief, and I know for many people getting rid of beliefs can be a very, very challenging and possibly traumatic thing, and that speaks to how dangerous they are. But anyway, I'm going to address one of my beliefs that I had and how I set out to change it using this idea of letting go. Okay, when I was young, as I was growing up in my childhood and into my early teen years, my grandfather was a major influence in my life. He taught me all kinds of things. Okay? He was the primary male role model in my life. And I loved him dearly. I think the world of him. But one of the things that happened was when he would teach me things such as working with tools and things, he was a little bit of a hoarder this way. He would keep every screw, every nut, every bolt, everything he had in coffee cans, and he would keep all of these things. And his reasoning was because you never know when you need something. Well, that sounded perfectly fine. That was legit, right? Yeah, you never know when you're going to need something. That way you don't have to run to the store and get it. And so he had tons of these coffee cans built up that were full of different parts of this and that and this and that. Well, I did the same thing. And it was a learned behavior, but it became an accepted belief, which created an unconscious mental pattern. So I started doing the same thing. I had coffee cans on my workbench in the basement and things in the house I was living in, and never really used any of it. Every once in a while I would find something, but most of the time I never used it. So over the years, I built up a lot of tools, and I built up all of these extra nuts and bolts and screws and fittings and everything else you can imagine. Right? And when I reached a turning point in my life, I I decided to start to rent instead of owning a home. I wanted to be free of that responsibility for a while. So we began with an apartment, and then we got a condo, both of which have maintenance done. So it made all of those things obsolete. I didn't need to keep all those coffee cans of things to fix things because I didn't have to fix anything anymore. That was pretty nice. It still is pretty nice, let me tell you. But I wrestled with that for a while. It didn't seem right to just give those things away or throw them away. And most of them were old and rusty and things like that anyway, but it was difficult to let go. I could feel that my mind was clinging to those things. So I underwent a practice. And when I engaged this practice, I went into this mental pattern and I looked for the root cause. And what I found was the root cause led back to the instruction I received from my grandfather. So then I took it further and I looked at what would be the root cause in his mind, possibly, to make this happen. And what I got to was this. There were times that I'd forgotten that he told me that the reason he does so much of this is because he lived through the Great Depression. Most people don't even remember what that was or anything about it. But he used to tell me about it in great detail. And he said at that time, you never threw anything away. I mean, they were having to hunt for their own food. They were having to sell pelts for money to get by. I mean, it was rough times. And he was taught to never throw anything away because you're going to reuse everything. And nowadays, with the consumptionism and consumerism attitudes that we have, we just use up everything and throw it away prematurely. And that's a terrible way to go. But he would cling to everything. And I was like, well, I'm not in a depression right now. It doesn't apply. And that doesn't apply to my way of life anymore either. So I discovered that this was the root cause. And I know this isn't terribly deep, but it's simple, so it gives you an idea of how it works. Because it had created a belief in me. And I was living according to that belief. But then I realized that belief was no longer going to serve me. So I needed to let go of that belief. And I wrestled with that for a little while because it was something my grandpa taught me, so I cherished it. And then I realized, well, I don't cherish that, I cherished him. So I was able to look at things this way and end up letting go of this belief that no longer served me. Now, it doesn't mean that I jumped into consumptionism. I'm not a consumptionist by any means. And it doesn't mean that I will forget the importance of that lesson should we fall on hard times again, because history has a tendency to repeat itself, doesn't it? Should it come around in my lifetime, then I have learned a lesson that when things start to get rough, you start to hold on to everything you have and reuse as much as you can and get the most mileage out of every single thing you have and every single dollar you make. So by letting go of the actual belief that was formed around what he taught, I was able to get to the essence of the lesson and at the same time free myself of all this material baggage that didn't really serve a purpose in my life anyway. I was able to get rid of it. So then I started to put my intention on what I did want. Well, I wanted to have those tools on hand that would be most crucial so I could fix things if necessary, do car repairs, things like that. But I used my intention to then let go of the other things that I really wasn't going to need anymore. When I'm living in California in an apartment or a condo, I don't really have a need for a chainsaw anymore, do I? So these sort of things I could let go of. And instead, I started to place my attention on this new way of living. And it became more and more comfortable. And ultimately, this resulted in me becoming free of a belief that was no longer serving me, while having the ability to learn the valuable lesson that was at the heart of what he was actually teaching me. This allowed me to lighten up the physical baggage in my life, and it also allowed me to lighten up with the mental baggage that I had formed around beliefs that were lessons taught to me by someone who had went through the Great Depression. For him, it was a very, very valid thing at the time. But after the Depression, I mean, he was living very well. But yet, he and my grandmother still lived by many of the beliefs that were formed during the Great Depression. It was like they were unable to let go of that Great Depression and be free of that and live free of that. So in so many ways, they lived due to unconscious mental patterns that had been created by living through that event. And then he did what he thought was right. He passed that along to my mother. He passed that along to myself. And it was good advice should you find yourself in that sort of event again. However, to live that way day to day is not necessary. And the same thing kind of went with the 11 o'clock news, right? My grandparents always watched the 11 o'clock news and then they go to bed. My parents watched the 11 o'clock news before they went to bed. I found myself, when I had started a family, watching the 11 o'clock news and then going to bed. And then after a while, I realized I don't like the 11 o'clock news. I don't like the news at all. And why am I watching something so negative right before I go to bed? This is not healthy for my mind nor my body, and I'm not going to do this anymore. So I stopped watching the news altogether. Here's another unconscious behavioral pattern that is just being handed down from generation to generation. It wasn't serving me. There's nothing on the news. And it was really interesting how the news at noon always tended to be light and fluffy and have fun things on there. But then the 11 o'clock news was always the negative stuff. And I will leave you to ponder the implications of such a thing. But I found it to be very unhealthy for my mind and my body, so I've stopped. I broke that. And then again, it was like, why am I doing it? Why am I sitting here watching it when I don't like it? Again, I had to bring it into the conscious mind from the unconscious mind. I had to realize this and then start to find the root cause of it and then be able to let go of it because it didn't serve me. Everybody thinks that just because somebody in your family who you loved passes something on to you, you've got to cling to that like it's part of your identity now. Otherwise, you lose your connection to them. This is totally untrue. It's totally untrue. Many things get passed on that don't serve us, and it didn't serve them, and it didn't serve the people before them. It hasn't served anyone. So we've got to be true and honest enough with ourselves within these practices to notice such things and then be able to focus our intention towards something more positive while holding our attention on that more positive thing and not allowing the negative thing to seep back in. In other words, if I found myself wanting to relax in the evening and there was nothing on, just turning on the news so I had background noise, I would stop myself from doing that and go, nah. See, I used my attention for that, and my intention was to be free of that. So I use those two things together to become free of that unconscious mental behavior as well. These are two pretty superficial examples because this can get really deep, but I'm using that because I want you to get an idea of the process and to see that there's nothing to fear in letting go. Letting go isn't a big, difficult process. Just by shifting our intention and attention onto the things we desire, we are already engaging the process of letting go. It's no more difficult or scary than that. I always tell people that it's not a matter of losing part of yourself. It's kind of upgrading yourself to the better version of you 2.0, right? That's the idea. you're not going to get lost. It isn't the best part of you is going to go away or anything like that. It's just that false part, that ego, and all of the unconscious mental patterns of behavior that it has helped to create that no longer serve us. Those are the things that we're letting go of. The things that will make us feel better, that will allow our heart to open, that will allow our vibration to rise, that will allow us to live in a constant state of appreciation and love, that will allow us to live a fully engaged life. That's worth letting go of all that stuff that holds us back. And having gone through the process, I can tell you that I would go through it again every day of the week to be where I'm at now. It doesn't mean I'm not still working. It doesn't mean I'm not still trying to become Robert 3.0, but it allowed me to have a much better sense of self, to get tuned into my true self, and to live a far better life. Holidays are coming up. You need this material. You need the book and the Appreciation Mastery audio program. I cannot stress to you how awesome that program is. If you're on the spiritual path, you need that program. Do yourself a favor. Do someone that you love this holiday a favor and get them that program. Order it. Make sure that you get it ordered and so you get in time for Christmas, because time is quickly running out. You can order those things only at www.expansionmastery.com. Make sure that you go there and order that as soon as possible. Do it today. Also, please make sure that you share and like and subscribe to all these things. Let's get some real spirituality out to people and share it with everyone so we can help this great consciousness shift take place. Till next time, my friends, I wish you the very best in your practices and your life. Take care.